And g'day, mate. Luke Ford here. We've got a different topic today, from the trench to the bench, navigating the legal system and finding your spiritual path. People don't normally think of navigating the legal system and finding your spiritual path along the way, but we have an attorney and a judge, Herbert Dodell. And Mr. Dodell, what led you to write this new book?
Well, I had decided about 10 years ago, after a conversation with a judge friend of mine. They were complaining about being short of judges. We were going through the economic crisis at the time. And he asked me if I would take a temporary appointment. And I thought about it and said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. How much time am I going to need to do as a volunteer? And it started out as one day, every couple of weeks. It ended up 3 days a week. So I was almost more than half time on the bench, and I was seeing a lot of things that were troubling to me because the average person had such little knowledge of the judicial system from the inside. And I was in the inside and said to myself, they really don't understand how it works. And there are two components. There's a physical component, which is an actual litigation or a criminal case. And then there's the spiritual component. Many people go into situations like this out of ego, anger, fear, frustration, whatever, or people get sued for things that they did and they now have to worry about responsibility and they're looking for ways out. And so there are two components to the litigation world. One is physical and the rules of evidence, which the public has no clue. And then there's the spiritual part. I had been studying spirituality for about 25 years. And at that time, I also said to myself, the law business has been very good to us. Put my kids through school, and we lived a very nice physical life. It has been very good to me. And I said to myself, it's time for me to do something for the public. And I was seeing people getting beaten up in the judicial system because they just didn't know what to do. And it made them very nervous because of the uncertainty. There's only one thing certain in the litigation, and that is that it's uncertain. And so I thought, well, if I help the people understand how it works and give them not only the rules, so to speak, but illustrations of what happened to other people, meaning it could happen to them, that would relieve a lot of their stress and anxiety. Because if you have a better idea of what to expect, maybe not all the time, but a reasonable idea of what to expect, then you can be objective about it. It's going to make you far less stressful, a lot more healthy, and will be better for society in general. So I started to write the book. And I took all the years I had tried, I guess about that time, 10 years ago, maybe 90 some odd jury trials, state and federal, civil and criminal. I had been a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County, so I had a criminal law background. I said, this is the opportunity for me to do something meaningful, pay it forward, so to speak. And the more I did it, the more cases that I saw, and I've had over 10,000 cases in my almost 10 years on the bench. So I thought I would use those as experiences, plus the ones that I had as a private practitioner, and do what I could do to help the public. And that was the basic motivation, for the book and the show.
And you've also got a radio show, so tell us a bit about your show.
Oh, well, that started out to be fun. I did an interview, like this, for a guy, Gary Garver is his name, and he talked me into doing a regular radio show. He thought it was interesting concepts and stuff like that, and I had some great stories of cases, all real cases. And so we call it For the People, because it is for the people. And every week we have a different subject matter. I've interviewed Roger Stone 4 times. Roger is an interesting character. I've had adult actresses to talk about things other than the prurient part of it. Some of those gals have been very, very intellectual, very smart, very motivated, but never really get to be heard by the public. The perception is they're, sex workers. I thought to give them an opportunity to tell it like it is from their side, and that has been interesting. I have expert witnesses like a tax person, a collection person, somebody that does insurance cases, someone who does malpractice. I've had many, many guests from all walks of the legal world, including the criminal part. How do you pick a lawyer? Most people have no clue how to pick a lawyer. They see the back of the bus or the big billboard saying, "I got $2 million from my cousin Harry." That's not the way to pick a lawyer. And so I give the public a chance to prepare for something that's going to be which may very well be an integral part of their lives for years to come. And so that was the motivation also. And that's what I've been doing. And the show has been fabulous. For me, anyway, I almost think of it now as a hobby. And so it's on once a week nationwide on iHeart for the people. And the producer, Gary Garver, is phenomenal. We have a lot of banter. He's got a great sense of humor, an infectious laugh. So the show, it moves along. It's got a great pace. It's not just one person sitting in front of a microphone spouting off things. So it's been very incorporative. And that's pretty much the show. And we had 30-some-odd thousand people last week, according to the person who does the social media. So I guess we're growing.
Now, I see when I'm looking at the archives of your show that you were supposed to have Lisa Ann on. Did she not show up?
No, what happened was the morning that she was supposed to be on that afternoon, she had a water damage claim to her house. Something had flooded or whatever, just couldn't come. She wants to reschedule it, though.
Okay.
And we're probably going to do that in a couple of weeks.
And you've had Ginger Banks on, the porn star Ginger Banks. What sticks in your memory about her appearances on your show?
How motivated she was to do the right thing. She was very concerned about new federal legislation, and in anticipation of the show, I read all of that legislation, and she was concerned about protecting people who were sex workers, and we ended up in the philosophical discussion, of course, of women's rights. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day anyway. Does a woman have a right to do with her body what she chooses to do with her body, and what role does the government have, if any, or should it have, in dictating the occupation of these gals that choose to go into that business? This came about before the recent anti-abortion legislation in Alabama, Missouri, and Mississippi, and some other states. But it's basically the same issue. She basically addressed that. And we talked about human trafficking. There's a big difference between sex workers and human trafficking. There are instances, of course, where women are put into that position that are brought here from some other country, and they're right. There certainly is some of that, and we all want to prevent that. But the other is like talking about the brothels in Nevada. I mean, maybe this is a time to recognize this as a legitimate industry, which appeals to people's interest. If they don't want to participate, they don't have to. It's all voluntary, and it provided, I think, a fresh perspective on the issue, just to provide the people with options. It's all about choices. And that's what we're still trying to do. I don't take any political positions. I'm a registered independent. Sometimes I agree with one side, sometimes I agree with the other. But the bottom line is, I think people need to have enough information to make choice. And I give people, I hope, choices. Tell them what side wants what thing, and what the other side says, and using legal principles and spiritual principles to varying degrees to help them make reasonably good choices.
So, what spiritual principles have you learned to implement in your life during the course of your study of spirituality?
I think the most important one is, and it applies in both the physical and in the spiritual world, is cause and effect. And there are different types of energies that exist in the universe. There's positive energy and negative energy. You can see that in a light bulb. You can see that in batteries with the pluses and the minuses. And so there's an energy out there. There's two energies out there. One is positive, which means being in the right place at the right time, fulfillment, satisfaction, and order. And the other energy is negative energy. And if you connect to the negative energy, wrong place, wrong time, chaos is what it is. And so we are given choice. The Creator gave us choice to do one or the other. In order to connect to the positive energy, you have to do what's sharing. It's called the desire to receive for the purpose of sharing. When you do something for the purpose of sharing, you connect to the positive energy that exists up there, and someday, maybe not instantly, but someday you'll be in the right place at the right time. You'll have to make a choice, and you'll make the right choice. On the other hand, if you do something strictly for your ego, anger, hate, evil speech, and things of that nature, you connect to the negative energy, wrong place, wrong time, illness, or whatever. And so I've used as examples, and I think it's a pretty good example. You take people like Bernie Madoff. They lived at the top of the game. How did they get there? They took from other people. They didn't do it the right way, so to speak, and now they're paying for it. And you can see that in many, many people who were once at the pinnacle of careers and are no longer anywhere because it caught up to them. Some of the Eastern religions, and spirituality is not religion. Some of the religions call it karma. And so if you're presented with an option and you can choose between the right thing and not the right thing, it's in your best interest. Best interest is a spiritual tool. It's in your best interest to do the right thing because it's going to ultimately inure to your benefit. And so when you're given choices like lawyers, I know a lot of lawyers that add an extra quarter of an hour here and there and everything because they want to make an additional amount of money. It's dishonest, plain old dishonest. Do they get what they want right away? Yeah, they get the instant moment where they pick up a few extra bucks. But at the end of the day, they're going to give it back. And it basically, you don't get to keep what you don't earn. And so our purpose here is to help each other to make this a more pleasant world for everybody. And that's the only way we're ever going to get peace. Because there'd be no reason to have war. And so I applied that to a lot of things. Cause and effect is a major consideration. Because it's about choice.
And what were the most difficult parts of writing this book?
Keeping it from being 1,000 pages. I needed to confine it to a limited amount, and I had to select a lot of things that I thought were either more to the point of the book or had some reason to be in there versus other things. I mean, I would like to have written more, and I probably will. But I think the hardest part was picking out and pointing out why that particular thing was significant.
And do you have any tips for avoiding getting sued?
That's a very tough question to answer, because if you do the right thing all the time, does that mean you're never going to get sued? No, it doesn't, because this could be something relating to something you've already done in the past, in your past life or in your current life, where you have done something wrong to somebody. You got to pay it back, and sometimes paying it back is in the legal world. Sometimes in other worlds. I don't think there's a real answer to that, other than to do the right thing because it's in your best interest.
Right. And I'm just curious, have you dealt with psychopaths? There's a theory that about 4% of the population are psychopaths, meaning narcissists, borderline personality, people like this. How have you dealt with that in your career? I mean, do you just avoid them? Do you have coping mechanisms? I'm just curious.
Well, it's a very broad question. From the bench side of it, I was assigned to restraining orders I sat between 5 and 6 years doing restraining orders. And if you want to talk about some crazy people, I had all kinds. I had everything from the neighbors shouting too loud to several child molestation cases, rape cases, things of that nature. So I really did cover the spectrum of what I heard. And some of them were so ridiculous that it just made no sense. And given the calendars that we had, we didn't have a lot of time for the nonsense. And so I would say I would limit, because you can do that. I could limit the amount of time that I would hear their case, but I'm not a psychiatrist, and I can't recommend to people how to change their lifestyles. But every now and again, I had a chance to do a little of that. But psychopaths are psychopaths. I had some lunatic took me up on appeal. He lost, of course. I should say, of course. He lost, but he was just absurd. He was totally 100% absurd. So you don't have to really deal too much with psychopaths because they're usually represented by lawyers. And when I was practicing full time, I tried very hard to take only clients that I either liked or believed in. A little altruistic, perhaps. But if you are in it for the right reason, being a lawyer, for the right reason, and somebody comes in and they're really psychopathic, you just tell them thank you very much, but I'm not interested in your case. Free choice, but then the money is very appealing. Somebody comes in, they're a little wacky, and they got a check for $10,000 for you, and you couldn't pay the rent last month. You know what? You just kind of slide it by. But that's taking it for the wrong reason. And ultimately, the likelihood is it will not be a great result. Likely. But you never know. You always have the right to change. That's what the Creator did for us. He gave us the opportunity to change. He gave us a rule book, a spiritual rule book, to allow us to do that. And if you follow that rule book, you can call it the Bible, you can call it the Torah, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But we got a series of rules, spiritual rules, and if you follow them, at least your life will be more meaningful to you. You may not get what you think you want, but what you think you want may not be what you really want. So spirituality has played a very important role in my life. It has molded me into whatever I am, from whatever I was, and that's the purpose of all of this. That's why you're here, is to make a correction.
Now, I've read that taking out a restraining order is usually a bad idea because what you're doing is humiliating the other party and thus increasing their odds for some kind of revenge.
No, not really. I don't think so. People always ask me about that. Do I think that issuing a restraining order, and by the way, I asked my clerk one day, I said, I know we're not keeping statistical records. I don't think we are. But what percentage of the restraining order applications do I grant? Because when I grant the restraining order and I sign that order, that person's life is now restricted, and they have to give up their guns. And there's a lot of things, ramifications, and it becomes part of your record, meaning that it's on there for the rest of your life. And if you're going for a job interview, somebody sees that there's a restraining order against you, they're already put on notice that they shouldn't be taking a chance with you. And I've called presidents of big companies, because when you call them up, when your clerk calls up and says the judge wants to talk to them, they'll talk to you. They don't know what you're calling about, but they'll talk to you. And I used to ask them, what effect does it have? He says, I can't do this publicly, but our HR people take a look and see a restraining order. That person doesn't get the interview. And so in restraining order court, you're dealing with a lot of personalities. Small claims court, which I've been doing for the last, 3 years or so, is only about money. So the categories are very, very different. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sure. I'm just curious, is there anyone that you granted a restraining order and the person responded by killing the person who asked for the restraining order?
No, I never had that happen, but it's an interesting story. There's a fairly famous lawyer out here in Los Angeles. Her name is Gloria Allred. Gloria Allred came in for a restraining order because some guy was harassing her every day, flooding her with emails and texts and whatever. But she wanted a restraining order. And I looked at the records. She had the phone records and everything. And I granted that. I granted the restraining order, and about 6 months later, I ran into her partner somewhere at some event. And I said, by the way, whatever happened? He said, the day you issued the order, the phone call stopped.
Wow.
So does it work? Yeah. Does it anger people to the point where they'll go out and do something? I didn't see it. But I've had some serious quasi-criminal cases. Real serious. There was a guy who was raping this 13-year-old girl every week. And he was in my courtroom, and the family finally found out about it and was seeking a restraining order. And the guy was there with his lawyer, and I said to him, he wanted to testify. And I said to him, is there a criminal case pending? Yes. I said, if you testify in this court, you will be waiving your Fifth Amendment right not to testify against yourself. I said to the lawyer, you still want him to testify? This is a very bad guy. He says, yeah, he wants to testify to tell his story. The story which made no sense to me. But bottom line is, that guy isn't going to bother this kid anymore. Because if he violates the order, he's going right to jail. And we have the ability to do that. The violation of an order is the equivalent of a contempt. And for contempt, we could put them in jail until we believe that the conduct will be abated. And also they get arrested. They got to hire a lawyer to defend themselves. So I think probably the restraining order works more often than not. Are there cases where it angers the other side so they do something? Probably. But I don't know the statistics of it.
And how about the online world? How has the rise of the internet affected your work and the type of cases that you may be facing?
Well, I've just written, we did a show on it actually. There is the battle right now, and you as a journalist would certainly appreciate it, between free speech and the government. Are we heading for 1984? I think to some degree we are. Is censorship becoming an issue? It is. How far does free speech go? Well, there's a case called Neer versus Minnesota, which was decided, 50 years ago, maybe more, where the quote from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes was, free speech does not allow to yell fire in a crowded theater. And so at some point, what we have to do, and what we've been doing, is balancing free speech or conduct in restraining order cases versus the government's right to stop it. And the magic words are compelling interest. The government has to have a compelling interest to stop somebody, because a restraining order is basically telling somebody they can't say or do something. They're now limited and on the penalty of going to jail. And so I always did. Every single case would look at whether or not the party seeking the restraining order had a sufficiently legal interest to prevent somebody from doing something. And I had to balance it. That's why I gave maybe 5%, 8% that I granted of all the 1,000 of them. I saw at least 1,000, maybe more. And so it's really, now it's becoming more prevalent because of the social media. People are saying and doing whatever they want. They could ruin somebody's life with a post. So what happens? Can you sue somebody for that? Well, the answer is you can under several theories, which I went over, by the way, in one of the shows which we did about 4 or 5 weeks ago. I talked about rights of privacy and defamation. There's a big difference between the right of privacy. You could sue somebody, but you have to prove that what they said was false. And there are some other areas of the law without going into them today. Like opinion is not chargeable, but it certainly affects your right of privacy. And if that's what's happening, there's causes of action in the civil court. So as bench officers, we have to monitor our calendars to make sure we don't have an overload of things that can be dealt with in a civil court. There's a lot of stuff that goes along with us. It's really a tough job if you take it seriously. Some judges don't take it seriously.
So what are the chances that the United States gets some European-style hate speech laws?
I don't know. I guess it depends on who's running the show in Washington. Hate speech, it really is a debatable issue because it is speech. And there's a case in California, the Huntington case, that talks about allowing speech that may incite people to take public action, and speech that is designed to incite somebody to do something. So I suppose you have to look at each incident of speech, determine whether it's hate speech or whether it provides a reasonable means of expression to the public. It's going to be tough cases. It's going to be very difficult.
I don't know if you've thought about, but use of social media, use of PayPal, people have been banned from those businesses for, say, saying things that violates the terms of service. Do you think that people who, say, been expelled from YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or PayPal have much of a chance for suing to get their Twitter account back, for example?
Well, every case is going to be different factually. The argument that is being made by one side, the regulatory side, is that they have the right, because it's business, they have the right to pick whatever customers they want or whatever contributors they want and establish reasonable rules to prohibit what they believe should not be publicly disseminated. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, for that too. I don't know if there's a sufficient definition of hate speech that can be applied to the facts of each particular case as it comes before the court.
It seems that most attorneys and most law schools are on the political left. Is that an accurate understanding of reality?
I don't know. I've never seen the statistics, but traditionally students if you look at recent history, students tend to be much more liberal. Not all students, but I suppose if you're looking at statistics, more than 50% are probably on the liberal side. It depends on what school you're at, too. Some schools are designed to promote or promulgate particular points of view, and others are not.
How's the Superior Court system working in Los Angeles after the cutbacks, the funding cutbacks of the past few years and the closing of some branches?
They did close some branches. I was covering 15 courts. That was my job. I was like the substitute teacher. I'd go for a week here, and they'd move me over there, and stuff like that. But I think that those days are pretty much over. We've got more and more judges. In fact, I was still actually occasionally sitting in Ventura, and they just hired 2 new judges. So there's less need to have an overflow, because the overflow was being covered. The courts that were closed, I never was quite sure that the decisions that they made were great decisions. I mean, I sat in Beverly Hills, and I kind of liked that court. Closed. Malibu, closed. San Pedro, where I served for a while, closed. I don't know if it accomplished anything, but I guess the pencil pushers or the bean counters have figured it out. And no, we're no longer understaffed, believe it or not.
The success of a legal matter, whether it's criminal or civil, depends upon a great deal on which courthouse is going to hear it, correct? So a jury...
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Smart lawyers will do what's called forum shopping to the extent that you can. You want to find the court where you're going to get the best shot. For example, if you're a plaintiff in a personal injury case in Los Angeles County, you want to be downtown. You absolutely want to be downtown, because the jurors are much more generous. Jury pool is much more generous. On the other hand, if you're a defendant, you want to be in a court where it's tilted very much, the judges are tilted very much to the defense side, and they certainly are out there.
Why are Americans so litigious?
I guess it's the excess of freedom, because every time you get hurt for something that you perceive as a hurt, you can sue for it. I have been saying for at least 30 years, because I was once very active in the trial bar, and I was saying we really need to convert the system we operate under, which is called the American system, into the British system. And the British system provides that the losing party pays the attorney's fees of the winning party. We don't have that here. There are certain circumstances, insurance cases, and some others, where you can recover attorney's fees if they're in the contract between the parties and things. But other than that, there's no incentive. If the loser has to pay for the winner, the loser's going to have to think real hard, or the potential loser, or you're just a litigant. He's got to think, what happens if I lose? I'm stuck for my lawyer, and I'm stuck for theirs too. And that is an incentive.
Do you have any advice for people on how to select a good lawyer?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I have a whole chapter in the book on it, because it really is one of the most significant decisions that a person has to make. I think you start off with recommendations from people who've had similar experiences and had favorable outcome, maybe not in the outcome of the case, but the favorable outcome with the lawyers. You want to start with the recommendations. That's what you want to do. Secondly, you want to sit and talk to that lawyer. What happens in the real world is that you go into some of these big firms and you meet the partner. They come in, they spend 10 minutes with you, and you never see them again. you get assigned to somebody who just got out of law school, and that's who your lawyer is. So you want to ask that lawyer that you're sitting across the desk from or in a conference room, who's going to really handle the case? What is their experience? And I would get into personal life. Oh, you're married, you have children, blah, 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 because that person is looking to sell you. They want you as a client, and they'll say whatever they can say to get you to sign up, especially if they're coming in, being brought in by an associate who's trying to make partner. And so you have to evaluate that person and ask that firm if they're willing to put up costs for expert witnesses. Ask that lawyer what they think they can do. You can't expect to promise. Nobody's going to promise you an outcome because the vagaries of the system don't permit for that. But you want to talk to that lawyer. What do they believe in? What's their track record? How many cases have they had? What do they think about your case? What's their initial impression? You want to get that visceral sense that that person's going to be with you, and that person should care about you. Most lawyers, I shouldn't say most lawyers, many lawyers don't care about the client. It's a paycheck. They do whatever they need to do, and sometimes even more than they need to do to run up the bill. You want to make sure that that person is somebody that you can relate to on a one-on-one basis. When you call them on the phone, they're going to take your call, and you're going to get the service that you hoped to get when you came there for the first time. Picking a lawyer is very difficult. And the question is, what kind of fee arrangement should you make or can you make? Is it negotiable? What is a lawyer supposed to do for you when you hire them? Sometimes you don't even need a lawyer. And I have a chapter in the book where I talk about that, like driving under the influence cases. Sometimes you don't need a lawyer. In fact, it doesn't do you any good whatsoever, and it just puts money in the lawyer's pocket because nothing's going to change. If you have a driving under the influence case where you have blown a 2-0 and the rule is 08, and you're over 08 by a lot, I don't care who your lawyer is. The prosecution has no reason to make a deal with you. Most deals are made as part of a plea negotiation. And if you got a shot of a negotiation to change something, then you do need a lawyer. Or if it's a second offense, or you're on probation. But the general DUI case, most of the time you don't need a lawyer. You just talk to the district attorney, the city attorney, and I even attach a form to the book called a plea waiver, a plea and waiver, and you can do it yourself. Save $2,000 to $5,000. So picking a lawyer is a very personal thing.
What kind of people are not cut out for litigation, meaning should really think 15 ways to Sunday before filing a lawsuit because they're just personally, psychically, psychologically not really equipped to the strain of bringing a lawsuit?
Well, I've started a new method, probably about 3 years ago. Ventura, actually, I started doing it, of pushing the parties to settlement. When I got assigned to small claims court, even in restraining orders, I was making efforts to settle, kind of threatening in a way. But we also found unique ways of getting cases settled. For example, I'm thinking about one case that I had where there were 3 girls had beaten up another girl from school. And they beat her up so badly that she had to be taken to the hospital. And so obviously she came in with her parents. They wanted a restraining order. They still went to the same school. And I said to them, okay, if I grant this, it's on your record for the rest of your life. Try to go to college and all of these other things, kind of threatening. I said, what I'll do is, if you transfer schools within the next 30 days, so you're not in the same school as her anymore, then I will dismiss the petition. The parents met, they made that agreement, and I denied the petition. So I settled it by pushing them and trying to come up and taking the time to do it. A lot of judges are overwhelmed by the clock, and they don't seem to have the time to sit with these people and get them resolved. And I did the same thing in small claims court, which is what I do now, is I tell the defendant that nobody knows who's going to win the case, and I'm the only arbiter of whatever's going to happen. And they don't know what I'm going to do. And if they lose, it's going to be on their record and credit report, and they may have a hard time dealing with paying it or whatever. But if they agree, the plaintiff agrees, I'll dismiss the case without prejudice, as long as they agreed to the terms, which is usually paying out whatever it is over a period of time. I'll structure it so that you don't have to pay it all at one time. I can stretch it out for a couple of years, which is what I do sometimes. The creditor is going to get money because they're going to get paid, and they get the statutory rate of interest, so they're not really being prejudiced. But the defendant doesn't have to carry this burden around for the rest of their lives. And I had to convince, I'll never forget it, I have the story in the book. I convinced some gal who had a lease with her boyfriend, and he just bailed out on her. He just left. And she wanted to get all the other half of the rent. And what I said to her was, I'll tell you what, I'll get him to pay what he owes you on a spread out basis. That way he will not have it on his credit, because I'll dismiss the case, reserving the right to enforce the settlement. And she didn't really want to do it because she really wanted to get even with him. I said, this is not about getting even. This is about getting you paid. She agreed, and the case was settled. I assumed that the guy paid because they never saw them again. But the reality is almost every case should be settled. Almost every case. I can't even think of cases where they shouldn't be. Sometimes it's just a matter of economics. It's going to cost you X dollars to litigate this case, and if you win, you're going to get X dollars plus $3 and change. Is it worth it? And I've seen clients over the years who couldn't sleep at night. They couldn't eat. They were so obsessed with their cases that it ruined it. And I would say to them sometimes, isn't it better to have this thing go away? Okay, you got wronged. Does it really matter at the end of the day? Because all you really want to do is be relieved from the anxiety of having to go through this whole process. And many times I get those cases settled. I actually went to school. They sent me to mediation school at Pepperdine University, and I took a course on mediation. And there's a lot of psychology that goes along with that. But we can really accomplish a lot if people are willing to talk. In fact, in many of the courts, they have a separate department where they assign a judge to be strictly a settlement conference judge. Happens all the time.
And what are some good reasons for bringing a lawsuit?
Well, the best reason is justice. But it's usually not about justice. If it's a monetary case, it's about getting my money back, or getting my damages, or punishing them, or doing whatever I'm going to do to them. And that spurns them into litigation. Defending a case sometimes, and there's another quick story about that one that I thought was very interesting. I had a couple sued a private school to get back the tuition for their daughter. The daughter wasn't fitting in very well, and they wanted all their money back, $10,000. And I said, I'll tell you what, which I always did, still do. Go out in the hall and see if you can't get it settled. Because otherwise you don't know what I'm going to do. Why take the risk? Why have the exposure? Go out there in the hall, get it settled. And I guess I had taken a recess after that case, and they came back in, they said they couldn't settle. And I found for the defendant, there was nothing in the agreement that provided for a return of tuition, especially under these circumstances. And at the end of the day, my bailiff, whose name was Talk, said to me, you know, Your Honor, I was in the hall and I heard these people talking. And the plaintiff wanted the whole amount. The defendant offered half. Plaintiff said, no, I want it all. Came back in, got a 0, and plaintiffs in small claims court do not have a right of appeal. So that was the end of it. By my ruling that way, the plaintiff gave up a shot at half the money. And I have that story in my book. And it's a real example of why you should settle. It eliminates the risk.
Yeah.
And you don't know who the judge is. And small claims is even more distinguishable because there's no lawyers permitted. And so there's only one person who's deciding it. And I had a day where I had 86 cases on the calendar for one day. 86 cases. Now, how much time do you think I could give these people? Not much. A lot of them go away, they settle, and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, you don't get a lot of time, and you got one person, you don't know who that person is, what they feel, and they're going to do it quick. So why wouldn't you want to settle it? Why not eliminate the risk, even if you think you're right?
What advice would you give for someone who is being stalked?
Seek a restraining order, absolutely. Stalking is included in the statute as one of the bases for a civil harassment order, restraining order. I had a celebrity in my court who was being followed by this guy because they were a very popular rock star, and they were being followed by somebody who was obsessed with them. You know, would hang out across the street. But, as long as they were not intrusive, I don't feel the right to restrain them from standing on a street corner. But once they got to the point where they were reaching over the hedge and they were doing all these other things, that justified the issuance of the order. They had to stay 100 yards away from any place where this person was. But sometimes it gets very interesting. What if they're roommates? How far can you separate them, you know? The legal system is filled with many different types of cases. That's why when you're in small claims court, believe it or not, the judges have to know more than the judges who are sitting in a particular department, whether they're listening to probate or whatever they're doing. Because you have to know the subject matters from everything dealing with life. Because those are the stories that come before you. One guy said he thought that the damage was caused to a house because it was haunted. That was one guy. There are great stories. I tell a lot of great stories in the book. Some of them are very entertaining. Some of them are illustrative. Some of them are there to establish a point. But that distinguishes this book from anybody else's. It's written for the idea of providing information to people who just want information. They want to know how it works. They don't have a case or anything. They just want to know how it works. There's another group that is in the system already, and they don't know what to do, and this gives them guidelines. I don't give any legal advice. I'm not permitted to do that. But I don't give any legal advice, but I give them guidelines, and I tell them how it works. If you're going to do this, you need to do A, B, C, and D. So we give them the guidelines, and what distinguishes us really is I put a spiritual twist on a lot of it. It's not a preachy book, but it makes a point about using the spiritual universal principles to convert your life from chaos to order and fulfillment. And so we do that, and the stories are there for illustration and a little chuckle. Some of them, people will chuckle. I actually had in front of me. But it's a book that could be put on the shelf in case something happens to you one day. You get arrested at 3 o'clock in the morning. What do you do? What's bail? How do you do it? How do you get out? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? It's a great reference book. In fact, when the book was reviewed by Kirkus, which is a company that reviews books, they found that it was a very helpful reference book. In fact, I got a great compliment from the retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Tennessee, who loved the book. She thought about the spiritual principles. She said she thought about them when she was on the bench, but she never really implemented it. So it covers lots of different subjects. It's an easy read. I don't use any legal terms. If I use the term like demur, I explain it in layman's terms, what that term means. So nobody has to guess what the hell does he mean by that. So it's a very layman-oriented book. It's almost like Law for the Dummies, I guess.
Okay, Judge, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And the book is called From the Trench to the Bench, Navigating the Legal System and Finding Your Spiritual Path Along the Way by Herbert Dodell. So thank you so much, Judge. It was good to talk to you.
By the way, it's available on Amazon.
Yes, sir. I've got a link to that.
And we encourage people to listen to the show, too. Because what I talked about today and otherwise, what we do on the show in an entertaining manner. So we encourage people, we invite people to listen to the show as well.
And you can find the judge's website, judgeherbdodell.us, and you'll find links to the radio show.
Right.
Thank you so much, Judge.
Thank you very much for talking with me, Luke, and I wish you a nice holiday tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.